It all started on a bright Saturday morning by the lake. I had just finished sanding my canoe and was ready to enjoy a quiet paddle when she appeared, Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed Queen of the Lake HOA. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown, and that signature power walk that made the gravel crunch in rhythm with her authority. "Sir, you can't use that canoe unless you're a dues-paying member," she barked, waving a neon yellow paper that looked more like a parking ticket than a notice. I simply smiled. "I'm not part of your HOA, Karen." Her jaw dropped. "Oh, you will be, or I'll have the police handle this trespass." She dialed 911 right there on the dock, loud enough for the seagulls to hear. I leaned against my canoe, calm as ever, because what Karen didn't know was this: she wasn't just calling the cops on a stubborn neighbor, she was calling the cops on her landlord. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe because this HOA story is about to take a wild turn. When I moved to Lakewood Shores, I wasn't looking for trouble. I'd spent 20 years as a civil engineer working on shoreline management projects, and I just wanted a quiet place to retire. The lake was perfect: calm mornings, distant loons, and the kind of silence that city people pay thousands to escape into. My cabin sat on the far east edge of the lake, a modest structure I'd been restoring over the past year. The only thing I didn't restore, thankfully, was my patience for petty authority. Now, Karen Whitmore wasn't just any HOA president. She was the HOA president, the type who treated bylaws like scripture and neighbors like subjects. Every property around the lake, except for mine and two others, was part of her precious Lakewood Shores Homeowners Association. She loved reminding everyone of that, especially during her weekly inspection walks, clipboard always in hand like a sheriff's badge. The first day we met, she strutted across my gravel driveway in her pastel pink blazer and oversized sunglasses, holding a stack of papers. "Good morning," she announced, her tone equal parts friendly and threatening. "I'm Karen, president of the Lakewood Shores HOA. I just wanted to drop off your welcome packet and collect your initial dues. You'll be a full member as soon as you sign these." I looked down at the papers, pages of bylaws, rules, and something called an amenity initiation fee. "I appreciate the visit," I said, "but I'm not part of the HOA." Her smile faltered. "Oh, all properties around the lake are part of it." "Not mine," I replied, tapping the old bronze survey marker embedded in the rock near the porch. "This lot predates the association by 30 years. Different parcel, different deed." She blinked, visibly recalculating. "Well, that's just a misunderstanding. Everyone benefits from the lake, so everyone contributes." "Sounds fair," I said. "But fairness isn't binding law." That was the first crack in her perfect HOA empire. A few days later, I found an envelope taped to my mailbox, notice of noncompliance. According to Karen, I had unauthorized watercraft storage and failure to display community parking decal. She even included a late fee for a membership I never signed up for. I couldn't help but chuckle. This was textbook HOA overreach. I'd seen it 100 times during my career, but something about her tone, self-assured, untouchable, piqued my curiosity. So instead of confronting her, I decided to observe. Over the next few weeks, I watched how she operated. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, she'd make her inspection round, snapping photos of lawns, mailboxes, even garbage cans. She sent group texts reminding people about weed height limits and decorative lighting color compliance. She was, in essence, the dictator of the dock. And people obeyed her. Out of fear, mostly. I overheard a neighbor named Miguel, a gentleman who ran the local boat repair shop, muttering to his wife one evening, "Karen fined me $200 for a missing sticker on my trailer. I can't afford to fight it." Another neighbor, Evelyn, whispered to me while pruning her roses. "She once threatened to tow my grandson's kayak for not having a registration tag. It's a kayak, for heaven's sake." The pattern was clear. Karen ruled through intimidation, and no one dared challenge her authority. No one except me. One morning, I received a mandatory attendance notice for something called the HOA New Resident Orientation. It read like an interrogation invitation. Failure to appear would result in escalating fines and suspension of lake privileges. I didn't even have lake privileges, but curiosity got the better of me, so I went. The meeting took place at the so-called Lake Club, a small aging boathouse with peeling paint and a sagging roof. Inside, Karen stood behind a lectern decorated with the HOA seal, flanked by two board members who looked like they hadn't smiled in years. "Welcome, everyone," she said, cheerfully adjusting her microphone. "We're thrilled to have new residents joining our beautiful, compliant community." Her gaze landed on me. "Mr. Thompson, you'll find our rules ensure harmony. Everyone here contributes equally, no exceptions." I raised my hand. "Quick question. Could you show me where in the county registry it says my parcel is under your jurisdiction? The room went quiet. Karen's smile froze like wet concrete in winter. Well, it's implied, she stammered. All lakefront properties are covered. Implied law doesn't hold up well in court, I said casually. Trust me, I've written enough shoreline lease agreements to know that. She shifted topics, immediately fumbling with her papers. Anyway, let's move on to the social calendar. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, she cornered me near the exit. You think you're clever, Mr. Thompson, but I will get you on the roster. Nobody freeloads here. Karen, I said, keeping my tone polite, I pay my own property taxes, utilities, and insurance. I built my dock, maintain it, and follow environmental permits. The only freeloader I see is the HOA using land it doesn't own. Her nostrils flared. Excuse me, that was my cue to leave. But her words echoed in my mind. Land it doesn't own. Back at my cabin that night, I pulled out my laptop and opened the county property records database. Old habit from my engineering days. Within 10 minutes, I had the Lakewood Shores parcel map on my screen, and something didn't add up. The lake club lot, the dock, even the shoreline parking area, they were all labeled under a ground lease, not fee simple ownership. The lessor was listed as Riverview Land Trust LLC. And here's where it got interesting. I recognized that name. Years ago, I'd done environmental consulting for a client who wanted to preserve natural water bodies while leasing surface rights to community groups. That client had asked me to structure the trust anonymously for liability reasons, and the trust's registered manager, still active, was me. In other words, the land under Karen's precious lakefront common areas wasn't hers. It wasn't even the HOA's. It was mine. That realization hit me like a cool wave. Suddenly, all her fines, threats, and fake authority became laughable. She was trying to regulate her own landlord. I decided not to reveal it yet. Instead, I wanted to see how far she'd go. Because there's something deeply satisfying about letting a self-proclaimed queen dig her own moat. Over the next few days, the HOA sent more letters. Unauthorized vehicle in driveway, improper fence height, unapproved paint color on deck railing. Each one arrived like clockwork, stamped with Karen's signature flourish. I kept every single one in a neat labeled folder. Evidence. When she finally called the cops on me for trespassing on my own shoreline, I knew the time had come to turn the tables, but not yet. I wanted her to feel untouchable first, to give her rope, lots of it. Because in HOA, land power isn't real until it's recorded in the right office. And in this case, it wasn't. And that's how a quiet engineer by the lake became the silent landlord of his own revenge story. The Monday after the orientation, Karen went into overdrive. I could tell because my mailbox started overflowing like a Vegas slot machine on payout day, each envelope printed with bold red letters, notice of violation. First offense, unregistered watercraft visible from public view. Second offense, failure to display HOA parking decal on personal vehicle. Third, unauthorized exterior modification dock bench not approved by the design review committee. She even included a $50 fine for non-attendance at community social events. I didn't realize skipping a potluck could be a crime, but apparently under Karen's regime it was grounds for economic punishment. Most people would have stormed into her office, slammed the notices down, and demanded answers. Not me. I'd learned long ago that you don't fight noise with more noise, you fight it with paperwork. So I started my own file. I labeled it K. Whitmore divided by HOA violations fabricated. Inside, I began placing every letter, every email, every text message screenshot from her HOA updates group chat. She didn't realize half her messages could be considered harassment under county law. Then came the funny part. She started escalating fines daily. 1 week later, she sent an invoice totaling $850. It read like a parody, daily non-compliance fee for unauthorized residents. Unauthorized, I'd owned the property since the late 90s. I decided it was time to dig deeper into her HOA's so-called authority. The next day, I drove down to the county clerk's office, a place that still smelled faintly of toner and bureaucracy. I'd spent enough of my career in places like this to know that power, real power, lives inside filing cabinets, not clipboards. "Can I help you, sir?" the clerk asked as I approached the counter. "Yes," I said, smiling. "I need copies of all recorded plats, leases, and easements pertaining to Lakewood Shores Homeowners Association, specifically the lakefront and dock parcels." The clerk typed for a minute, squinting at the screen. "That's interesting," she said slowly. "There's no fee, simple ownership for those parcels under the HOA's name. The land is leased from Riverview Land Trust Renewable every 10 years. I nodded, pretending to be surprised. Do you happen to have the current lease on file? She printed it out, 32 glorious pages of legal language. I skimmed the bolded sections, grinning as I found what I was looking for. Clause 9b. The lessee shall not impose fees, restrictions, or encumbrances upon non-member landowners possessing riparian rights without the lessor's prior written consent. Translation. The HOA had zero authority over me or anyone else who owned private land adjacent to the lake unless I as lessor signed off. And spoiler alert, I hadn't. I made certified copies, paid the clerk, and thanked her for her time. As I walked out, I couldn't help but think, this is going to be fun. When I got home, Karen's latest HOA emergency bulletin was already waiting in my inbox. Subject Your Gent, trespasser on HOA. Residents are advised that an unregistered individual, Lot E14, continues to violate community rules. Law enforcement will be notified if he is seen using the lake facilities again. She even attached a blurry photo of me carrying my canoe as if I were some sort of fugitive water bandit. The absurdity was delicious. I decided it was time to meet some allies. That evening, I stopped by Miguel's boat repair shed. The man looked exhausted. She find me again, he said before I could even say hello. Said my tools create visual clutter visible from Lakeview properties. It's a shed, I nodded sympathetically. You ever seen her actual authority documents? The lease. Miguel frowned. Lease? You mean the HOA owns the lake, right? I smiled. They lease it from someone else. His eyes widened. Wait, what, who? That's the best part, I said. You're talking to him. He nearly dropped his wrench. You're serious, very. I explained the structure, the Riverview Land Trust, the clauses, the limitations, and his expression turned from disbelief to awe. So all those fines? Legally worthless, I said. But don't tell anyone yet. Let her dig her own hole first. Word spread quickly, though not from me. By the weekend, neighbors started whispering. The new guy's a lawyer, one said. No, he's a government agent, said another. Karen noticed the shift her little empire was starting to crack, so she doubled down. She called for a disciplinary hearing against me scheduled at the Lake Club. Failure to appear, her notice read, will constitute admission of guilt and further fines. I RSVP'd with a short note, looking forward to it. Please have copies of all governing documents, bylaws, and recorded property descriptions available. I'll bring mine. When I walked into that boathouse a week later, I found half the community seated in folding chairs. Karen stood at the front posture, stiff hair sprayed into a helmet of confidence. She cleared her throat. Miss Thompson, this board has found you in repeated violation of HOA rules and policies. We have photographic evidence and resident complaints. I raised my hand. Before we go further, could you clarify something? Are you acting under the authority of the HOA or the lessor? The HOA, of course, she snapped. Wonderful. Then we'll proceed under Clause 9b of your lease. Her brow furrowed. What clause? I pulled a thick envelope from my briefcase and slid it onto the table. The one that says you can't impose fees on property owners like me without the lessor's consent. And since I am that lessor, well, you might want to reconsider your fine schedule. The room erupted. Miguel and Evelyn exchanged looks of pure joy. Karen's jaw slackened, but she recovered quickly, muttering something about forgeries and misunderstandings. I leaned back, calm and collected. You're welcome to verify it with the county clerk's office. The documents are public record. The treasurer whispered to her, pale as a ghost. She excused herself to make a phone call in the hallway. I could hear snippets through the thin boathouse walls. No, I swear it says Riverview Land Trust. Yes, that Thompson. What do you mean we're tenants? When she came back, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. This meeting is adjourned, she said shakily, gathering her papers. I stood up. Oh no, Karen, we're just getting started. Because I wasn't done yet. I still had the missing piece, the HOA's financial records, which I knew were hiding more skeletons than a Halloween party. And now that she'd called the cops on her landlord, I had every reason to expose her little empire for what it really was, a sinking ship on leased land. The next phase wouldn't just be about petty fines anymore. It would be about money, fraud, and liability, the kind of words that make HOA presidents lose sleep, and I was wide awake. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of calm, mirror-still day when the lake looked like a sheet of glass. I had just pushed my canoe into the water, camera in hand, planning to photograph the sunrise mist curling over the surface, peaceful, quiet, until the sound of heels on dockboards shattered it. Mr. Thompson. Karen's voice carried like a foghorn. She marched down the dock in her bright orange blazer and oversized sunglasses, clutching her phone and a folded clipboard like she was storming a courthouse. I've warned you repeatedly about unauthorized use of HOA facilities, she shouted. This is the last time you're trespassing on private property. Private, I said calmly, resting the paddle across my lap. That's interesting, considering I pay the taxes on the land under your shoes. Her face went crimson. Don't you start that again? This dock is community property leased, I interrupted softly from Riverview Land Trust. Which, in case you forgot, isn't the HOA. You're standing on a leasehold, not ownership. Enough, she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. If you refuse to comply, I'll call the police right now. Be my guest. I wasn't being cocky. I genuinely wanted her to call. It was the only way to bring official eyes onto the situation. She spun on her heel phone already to her ear. Yes, this is Karen Whitmore, HOA president of Lakewood Shores. I need immediate assistance. There's a trespasser on private HOA property refusing to leave. She made sure her voice carried across the nearby yards. Curtains moved, doors opened. Within minutes, neighbors gathered at the shoreline, some with coffee mugs, others filming on their phones. HOA drama was their morning entertainment, and I was the new episode. Karen finished her call with a triumphant smirk. You'll regret this. I doubt it, I said, leaning back casually. Just make sure they bring the county deed book. 15 minutes later, a sheriff's SUV rolled up to the cul-de-sac. 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting calmly on their belts. You could tell they'd seen this kind of suburban chaos before. One of them, a grizzled officer named Deputy Rowland, approached first. Morning, folks, he said evenly. We got a call about a trespass situation. Karen practically leapt forward. Yes, officer, this man is illegally using HOA property. He refuses to pay dues or follow our rules. Rowland turned to me. Sir, is that true? I live here, deputy, I said, handing him my ID and a neatly folded document. And as you'll see, this land isn't HOA owned, it's under a lease agreement with my trust. I have riparian rights recorded with the county. He unfolded the papers, slowly scanning the highlighted sections I'd prepared. I could see his expression shift from routine to interest. Karen noticed too. Those are fake, she hissed. He printed those on his home computer. Ma'am, Rowland said, these are certified copies with county seals. Her smile cracked. Well, that can't be right. The bylaws? Ma'am, he interrupted again, this time firmer, bylaws don't override recorded deeds. That line hit harder than I expected. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I took the opportunity to stand and point toward the ground beneath the dock. Deputy, if you check the county property map, parcel number E14 and the lake access strip are leased to Lakewood Shores HOA under Riverview Land Trust, renewed every 10 years. The current lease expires next spring, and there's a clause that prohibits harassment of non-member landowners. He blinked. You're familiar with the lease terms, I wrote them, I said plainly. The silence that followed was exquisite. Karen laughed nervously. He's bluffing, he's making all this up. I pulled another envelope from my backpack, the landlord's notice of cure rights, and handed it over. I notified the board 3 weeks ago of pending non-compliance safety violations, unpermitted dock wiring, and expired insurance certificates. They ignored it. So by lease terms, their authority is suspended pending cure. Rowland read for a moment, then turned to her. Ma'am, do you have documentation proving ownership or current compliance? Karen fumbled through her clipboard, flipping through color-coded pages, most of which were printouts of HOA bylaws and violation forms. Right here, Section 12 of our community code. That's not a deed, Rowland said bluntly. That's an internal rulebook. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Behind her, a few neighbors began whispering. One muttered, I told her she couldn't find me for my porch color. Another whispered, wait, does this mean we're tenants? Karen spun around. Quiet, everyone quiet. Then back to the officer. You have to remove him. He's disrupting the peace. Rowland looked at me. Sir, do you plan to cause any disturbance? No, deputy. I'm simply enjoying the lake I maintain on property I legally lease to this HOA. He nodded. Then I don't see a crime here. Karen's mouth opened like she was about to scream, but only a strangled sound came out. This is my neighborhood, my rules, Rowland sighed, clearly reaching his limit. Ma'am, unless you can provide proof of ownership or court order, I suggest you step away and resolve this civilly. Calling 911 for non-criminal disputes can lead to penalties. The word penalties shut her up faster than any argument I could have made. He handed back my papers, gave me a polite nod, and turned to leave. The crowd began to disperse, though not without some hushed laughter and a few sympathetic thumbs-ups. Karen, red-faced and trembling, stood frozen. As the deputies drove off, I leaned my paddle against the dock and smiled. Next time, Karen, maybe check the lease before calling the cops. She spun around, shaking with rage. This isn't over, Mr. Thompson. I'll take this to the county attorney myself. Perfect, I said cheerfully. I've been meaning to speak with him too. She stormed off her heels, clacking on the boardwalk, muttering something about fake landlords and forgeries. I watched her disappear up the hill toward her pristine two-story house, the same one that technically sat on leased ground. I should have left it at that, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to visit the county attorney's office the next morning just to see what Karen might stir up. When I arrived, the attorney, Mr. Leland, a patient man in his 60s, welcomed me in. "Ah, Mr. Thompson, I already heard about yesterday's lake theatrics." I chuckled. I figured as much. He gestured for me to sit. "Miss Whitmore called this morning demanding criminal trespass charges." I explained to her politely that she can't evict her own lesser. I couldn't help but laugh. I imagine that didn't go over well. Not particularly. But it gets better. She filed a complaint about unpermitted dock repairs which backfired. Turns out the HOA itself lacks a valid stormwater permit. They're already under review. Now that was poetic justice. As I left his office, one thing was clear: this wasn't just about a petty power struggle anymore. The lease violations, unfiled permits, expired insurance. Karen had exposed her entire HOA to legal jeopardy, and I now had everything I needed to push the situation toward a full reckoning. And she had no idea the storm that was about to hit her perfect little lake. The morning after my little dock showdown went viral across the lake group chat, I woke up to find a dozen text messages from neighbors. Some congratulated me for standing up to Queen Karen. Others asked nervously, "Are we really tenants?" And one brave soul sent me a photo of a rotting dock post with the caption, "Think this counts as a violation." That photo lit the fuse for what would become a very expensive revelation. See, when you've worked in civil engineering as long as I have, you start seeing everything like an inspection report. The warped planks, the rusted bolts, the flickering boathouse lights, all of it screamed code violations. And the more I looked, the clearer it became that Karen's HOA wasn't just overstepping its power, it was rotting from the inside out. I decided to conduct my own quiet inspection. That week, I walked the lakefront in early morning light, clipboard in hand, like a reverse Karen documenting not people's fences, but the HOA's own infrastructure. What I found was stunning: 4 dock pylons eaten through with rust, electrical lines running across water without conduit protection, a boathouse junction box dated 2009, open to rainwater. And worst of all, stormwater runoff pipes emptying directly into the lake without sediment filters. Each of those was a violation of the county's Environmental and Shoreline Safety Act. But it got better. When I pulled the building permits, I realized half of them were expired or missing entirely. The lake club renovations from 3 years ago never approved. The dock expansion Karen bragged about at last summer's meeting not even filed. In short, the HOA was sitting on a powder keg of liability. I compiled everything into a neat 12-page report and mailed a copy, certified of course, to the county inspector's office with a polite note: possible public safety concerns on leased lakefront property parcel number E14. Recommend review prior to renewal period. Within days, the inspector scheduled a visit. And just like that, Karen's iron grip started to tremble. When she saw the county vehicle pull into the parking area, she came storming down in her power suit, yelling before the poor inspector even stepped out. "This is private HOA business. You can't just waltz in here." The inspector calmly flashed his badge. "Actually, ma'am, since you're operating under a county lease and claiming public access areas, we can." "You signed that acknowledgement." Her voice dropped to a panicked whisper. "Who filed the complaint?" The inspector shrugged. "Anonymous, ma'am." I watched the whole exchange from my porch, coffee in hand, pretending to be deeply fascinated by a seagull. That night, I got a knock on my door. It was Miguel holding a folder. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, stepping in. "I work with the contractor who installed the lake lighting. He hasn't been paid in 6 months. Says the HOA account's been frozen twice." I opened the folder: invoices, payment orders, and something juicier, a bank lien notice against the HOA's leasehold interest. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "My cousin works at the bank," he said. "He says the HOA took out a $400,000 line of credit against the lease last year. Karen told the board it was for beautification projects. But it looks like, well," he trailed off, flipping to the last page, a transfer of funds labeled Operating Contingency Authorized Signature K. "Whitmore." I whistled low. "Operating contingency, huh? That's a fancy term for I needed new countertops." The next day, I paid a visit to the county clerk's office again. Using my trustee credentials for Riverview Land Trust, I requested the HOA's lease compliance records. The clerk hesitated, then said, "Oh, I remember you, the landlord guy. You'll want to see this." She handed me a thick folder of correspondence. Buried inside were warning letters from the County Environmental Board dated 3 months ago, flagging unpermitted structures, insurance lapses, and late safety audits, all ignored. At that point, I knew Karen's empire wasn't just built on arrogance, it was built on debt and denial. I sent a formal landlord's inspection and reservation of rights notice to the HOA board, outlining potential defaults under Section 11A of the lease failure to maintain safety insurance and legal compliance. I copied the county attorney, the insurance carrier, and the bank that held the HOA's line of credit. In simple terms, I'd just thrown a legal grenade into their clubhouse. By Friday, chaos had erupted. Board members started resigning. Neighbors whispered in driveways. Someone even made a meme of Karen's furious face with the caption, "We are the O, but apparently not the owners." When Karen finally showed up at my doorstep, it wasn't with her usual smug grin. She looked nervous. "Mr. Thompson," she began stiffly, "I understand you've been spreading misinformation about our financials. Everything I've said," I replied, "is backed by public record. You're destroying our community's reputation." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself when you called the cops on your landlord." Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny?" "Not funny," I said, sipping my coffee. "Just educational." She turned to leave, but stopped halfway down the porch steps. "You may have your fancy paperwork, but I have votes. The residents trust me. Then maybe you should tell them about the unpaid contractors, the missing permits, and the lease you're one default away from losing." She froze, clutching the railing. "What lease?" Oh, she'd said it out loud. I smiled. "The one Riverview Land Trust owns. You know, the one under your feet." That was the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Later that night, Miguel texted me again. "Miguel, she's panicking. Just called an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Said something about taking control before the landlord does." Perfect. Because what she didn't know yet was that I'd already sent copies of the lease violations and default clauses to every single board member. By the time that meeting began, they'd realized the truth: the HOA's authority was dangling by a legal thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. But I wasn't done. There was still one more layer to expose the money trail. The beautification loan, the overdrawn maintenance account, the phantom reserve fund. I had a plan to reveal it all. Not in private, not quietly. I'd do it in front of the entire community at the next public HOA meeting, where Karen loved to show off her leadership. This time, she wouldn't be walking out with applause. She'd be walking out with her crown shattered and her own board turning against her. And all I'd have to do was show them the truth projected in bright letters, clause by clause, for everyone to see. It was the night of the big meeting. The air around Lakewood shores buzzed with anticipation like a summer storm. Word had spread faster than gossip in a beauty salon Karen called an emergency HOA session. Something about a rogue landlord and fake documents. By 7 o'clock, the boathouse parking lot was full. Pickup trucks, minivans, even a few golf carts lined the gravel shoulder. I parked at the edge, took a deep breath, and grabbed my briefcase neatly organized, labeled, and as Karen would soon learn, fatal to her delusions. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The room glowed with string lights that flickered uncertainly, as if they too were nervous about what was coming. Folding chairs filled every inch of the space. At the front stood Karen Whitmore in her trademark pink power suit, chin lifted high like a general preparing for war. Her smile looked painted on, but her eyes told another story, fear disguised as confidence. She tapped the microphone, voice trembling just slightly. "Good evening, residents of Lakewood Shores. I've called this emergency meeting to address ongoing disturbances caused by one individual who's been spreading falsehoods about our beloved community." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She continued louder now. "This man, Mr. Thompson, has attempted to undermine the HOA's authority, misrepresent legal documents, and interfere with our governance." I smiled politely from the third row. Theatrics, predictable. Before she could continue, I stood up. "Madam President, if I may," Karen blinked. "You'll have your chance to speak after the agenda." "With respect," I said, projecting my voice so everyone could hear, "you called this meeting about me. It's only fair the accused gets to respond." Whispers, nods. Even a few scattered, "Let him talk from the back." Karen hesitated, then forced a smile. "Fine. 5 minutes." I walked to the front slowly, my steps echoing against the wooden floorboards. I placed my briefcase on the lectern and looked around the room. Familiar faces, tired faces, people who'd lived under her thumb for years. "Evening, everyone," I began. "I'm not here to pick fights. I'm here to show facts." Karen crossed her arms. "You can't prove I clicked the projector remote. The first slide appeared on the wall behind me, the official county GIS map of Lakewood Shores. Color-coded parcels, property lines, and right in the middle, a bold green outline labeled Owner Riverview Land Trust, LLC. Lessee Lakewood Shores Homeowners Association gasps filled the room. I pointed at the map. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth. The HOA does not own the land beneath the lake, the dock, or the clubhouse. It leases them from my trust. Karen's hand shot up, trembling with fury. That's irrelevant. The HOA manages. Under lease conditions, I interrupted. Conditions your board has repeatedly violated. I clicked again. Slide 2, Clause 9b, highlighted in yellow. The lessee shall not impose fees or restrictions on non-member landowners possessing riparian rights without written consent of the lessor. That means, I said, clearly you can't fine me, tow my canoe, or charge a single penny without my written approval. Miguel raised his hand from the back row. So, you mean all those $50 dock permits? Illegal, I confirmed. Void on arrival. Karen's face went pale. That clause doesn't apply anymore. It was amended. Oh, I smiled, flipping to the next slide, a scanned renewal page with her signature. You renewed this lease last year, remember? No amendments were ever recorded. The crowd laughed nervously. Someone whispered, she signed her own trap. I advanced another slide, photos of the rotting dock pylons, the exposed electrical wiring, the stormwater pipes dumping straight into the lake. You've all paid dues for maintenance. Yet here's what your improvements look like. According to the county, these are unpermitted structures and environmental violations, Karen stammered. Those were supposed to be fixed, the contractors. The contractors haven't been paid, I said, holding up copies of unpaid invoices, because your funds were redirected to a so-called beautification project. Slide 5 appeared bank statement excerpts showing a $38,000 transfer labeled under Karen's authorization. The room erupted. Evelyn, the retired auditor, stood up. I knew it. I asked for those ledgers months ago. Karen tried to regain control. That's a temporary expense. A reimbursement. For granite countertops, I said flatly. At your house. Gasps turned to murmurs, then to open outrage. Karen banged the table. This is a smear campaign, I turned to the crowd. Tell me, do you feel smeared or cheated? The treasurer, an older man named Doug, slowly stood. Ma'am, is this true? Karen glared at him. Doug, don't you dare. He cut her off. We're supposed to vote on every major expense. You never brought this up. The silence that followed was heavy enough to sink the dock. I took a deep breath. Look, I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, but you all deserve transparency. Your HOA's lease is on the brink of default, and when that happens, the county can revoke it. You lose the dock, the clubhouse, everything. Someone asked timidly what happens then. Well, I said, as the landlord, I'd have two choices, terminate the lease or grant a new one under honest management. Evelyn raised her hand. If we remove the current president, would you consider renewal? I smiled. I'd consider it strongly. Karen's chair screeched as she stood. You can't do this. I built this community. I am this HOA. I turned to her, lowering my voice. No, Karen. You're its biggest liability. The room went still. Then Doug stepped forward, trembling but firm. I moved to remove Karen Whitmore from her position as president of Lakewood Shores HOA, effective immediately. The motion spread like wildfire. Seconded, shouted someone from the back. Hands shot up one after another. Karen spun around, desperate. You can't. This isn't on the agenda. This is illegal. Evelyn looked her dead in the eye. So was every fine you ever issued. The vote was unanimous. Karen stood there, frozen, her face pale and eyes glassy. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. I approached gently, leaning close so only she could hear. I gave you every chance, Karen. You just never bothered to read the fine print. Then I addressed the crowd. I'll meet with the interim board this week to discuss a renewal plan. But for now, let's make sure this community never runs on fear again. As I packed up my projector, the room burst into applause. Neighbors shook my hand, thanked me, even laughed in relief. The nightmare was finally over. Karen, meanwhile, stormed out into the night, muttering something about lawsuits. But she didn't know that the worst was still coming. Because the HOA's bank lender, now aware of the default, had already reached out to me, the landlord, to negotiate next steps. And those next steps were going to make her wish she'd just stayed off my dock that morning. By Monday morning, the lake was eerily quiet. No morning walkers, no chatter on the HOA group chat. Not even the usual gossip at the mailboxes. Word of the public meeting had spread beyond the neighborhood. Nearby communities were sharing clips online with captions like HOA, president owned by landlord, and when Karen calls the cops on her boss. I wasn't gloating, well, not entirely. But I knew this was far from over. Karen might have lost her title, but she wasn't the type to retreat gracefully. And sure enough, by Tuesday I received a letter from her attorney, our client Miss Karen Whitmore hereby demands immediate cessation of defamatory actions and public statements that damage her reputation. It went on for 3 pages, filled with bold, legal buzzwords. I almost admired the effort. Almost. I forwarded the email to my attorney Lydia Park, who called me an hour later, half laughing. She's threatening defamation after embezzling HOA funds, apparently, I said. Lydia chuckled. Then it's time to play the real game. See, the beauty of lease law is that it doesn't care about drama, only about compliance. And Karen's HOA was in material breach on 3 counts: unpermitted construction lapsed, insurance, and financial mismanagement. I had the right to terminate their lease entirely. But instead of swinging the axe immediately, I chose the scalpel. Lydia drafted a notice of default and forbearance agreement proposal, a cold surgical document giving the HOA 30 days to cure its violations or face eviction. It outlined terms: full financial audit, repairs insurance, reinstatement, and cessation of unlawful fines against non-member property owners. The tone was professional, the message was not. When the interim board received it, they panicked. I heard about the emergency Zoom call that night through Miguel, who texted me mid-meeting. Karen's screaming in the background. Says she'll sue the landlord personally. M.E. She can try. I am the landlord. The next day, the HOA's bank, the same one holding their $400,000 line of credit, reached out. The loan officer, a man named Daniel Reed, sounded nervous. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "we just got wind of the potential lease termination. That would technically nullify our collateral. Is that accurate, afraid?" So I said, "If the lease ends, the HOA's rights to the property end with it." He sighed. "Understood. Then you'll likely hear from our legal department soon." By Friday, the HOA's attorney was begging for a meeting. We arranged it at the county administration building, neutral ground. When Karen showed up, she was almost unrecognizable, her signature pink blazer replaced with a dull gray jacket, her usual commanding tone replaced with a brittle, defensive whisper. Across the table sat me, Lydia, and the bank's representative. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and tension. Karen's lawyer started. "We're here to discuss a resolution. My client believes," I cut him off gently. "No beliefs. Just facts." I slid a folder across the table. "This is the lease default package. You have 30 days to fix everything: safety, finances, permits, or the lease is terminated. The HOA dissolves and possession reverts to the landlord." Karen leaned forward, hands shaking. "You can't just take our property." "Your lease property," I corrected. "And yes, I can." The bank rep cleared his throat. "If the lease is voided, our loan's collateral evaporates. We'd have to call in the debt immediately." Karen's lawyer paled. "That would bankrupt the association." "Then you'd better cooperate," Lydia said smoothly. Karen's composure cracked. "You can't do this. You're just some retiree with too much time, Karen," I said softly. "You've spent months fining people for mailbox heights and garden gnomes. You called the police on your own landlord." "I'd say I've been patient." She went silent. We gave them the weekend to think it over. By Monday morning, I had a message from Miguel. Board voted. They're accepting the forbearance terms. Karen stormed out and resigned. She's talking about running for office in another HOA across town. Emmy, God help them. That afternoon, I met with the new board, Miguel, Evelyn, and Doug, at my cabin. I grilled some coffee over the porch fire pit as they reviewed the agreement line by line. Evelyn smiled. "So we fix the dock, get the permits, clean up the finances, and you'll renew our lease." "Exactly," I said. "But with one new clause: no HOA member or officer can issue citations, fines, or restrictions on non-member landowners. Ever again." Miguel laughed. Music to my ears. We signed the agreement right there, with birds chirping and the lake shimmering behind us. But just as peace seemed to settle over the community, Lydia handed me another envelope later that day. "You'll want to see this," she said. Inside was a county court notice. Karen had filed for an injunction claiming my lease enforcement was retaliatory and fraudulent. I sighed. Of course she did. Lydia smirked. "Don't worry. She filed it under the wrong statute. She doesn't realize she just submitted evidence proving you're the landlord." I laughed. "You're kidding." "Nope. She even attached your name from the deed as proof. It's basically a confession wrapped in paperwork." It was poetic. Her own filing officially recognized me as the legal owner of the land she'd been terrorizing everyone on. Within a week, the judge dismissed her injunction with prejudice, meaning she couldn't file it again. The final blow came when the bank sent her a demand letter for immediate repayment of the HOA's outstanding loan. Since she'd personally co-signed the credit line, she was liable for the debt, over $370,000. The day she got that notice, she showed up at my cabin again, this time in tears. "You ruined me," she whispered. "I was just trying to protect this neighborhood." "No, Karen," I said gently. "You were trying to control it." Her lip trembled. "What do you get out of all this satisfaction?" I thought for a moment. "Peace, order, accountability." She glared through watery eyes. "You're a monster," I shrugged. "Maybe, but at least I read the fine print." That was the last time I saw her as HOA president. A week later, she moved out quietly, leaving behind stacks of old bylaws and a pink folder labeled Community Harmony Initiative. The irony didn't escape me. That evening, as the sun dipped over the lake, I poured myself a bourbon on the porch and watched the reflection of the dock lights shimmer on the calm water. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was quiet, genuinely quiet. I'd played the long game and it had worked. The cops she called on me were long gone, the fines erased, the lake finally free from tyranny. What she never realized until the end was that I didn't just own the land. I owned the patience she lacked and the silence she could never control. And in the world of HOAs, that's the most powerful deed of all. The weeks following Karen's downfall were nothing short of surreal. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact on the sidewalks now waved when I passed. The air around Lakewood Shores felt lighter, almost like the lake itself was exhaling after years of tension. The HOA meetings, once battlegrounds of ego and gossip, turned into honest, productive discussions about repairs, safety, and rebuilding trust. I wasn't on the board I never wanted to be, but the new leadership with Miguel Evelyn and Doug at the helm often came to me for advice. Not as their landlord, but as someone who understood how fragile communities could become when one person's pride outweighed everyone's peace. One evening, Miguel stopped by my cabin holding a stack of blueprints. "We've decided to rebuild the dock," he said, laying them on my porch table. "Properly this time, with permits, insurance, and code compliance. And we'll use local contractors who actually get paid." I looked over the plans. They were clean, practical, sturdy, nothing extravagant. "Looks good," I said. "You'll have my approval in writing by tomorrow, and the lease renewal clause it'll go through once those repairs are complete." He grinned. "Thanks, boss." "I'm not your boss, Miguel," I said with a chuckle. "Just the guy who owns the mud under your feet." He laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's what makes this place interesting." By summer's end, the transformation was stunning. The old splintered dock was gone, replaced by a solid cedar walkway. The cracked boathouse walls had been repainted in soft lake gray. Kids played on paddleboards, laughter echoing across the water. And for the first time in years, there wasn't a single complaint letter taped to anyone's door. The county inspector came by for a final walkthrough. "Well, Mr. Thompson," he said, signing the compliance form, "I've seen HOAs implode before, but never recover like this. Whatever you did, it worked." I smiled. Sometimes the best renovation isn't physical, it's cultural. Still, the ghost of Karen lingered. Her house had been listed for sale barely 2 weeks after her defeat, a pale pink 2-story with trimmed hedges and a "for sale by owner" sign leaning crookedly in the yard. Rumor had it she'd moved across the lake to a different HOA. Some joked she was probably already running for president there. Others said she'd gone bankrupt after the bank seized her accounts. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Some storms move on their own. There's no need to chase the thunder. One afternoon, while organizing old documents in my cabin, I found a thick folder labeled HOA Correspondence Early Years. Inside were the original lease drafts I'd written 20 years ago. Back then, I had no idea the tenants of that land would one day become my neighbors, or that one of them would nearly turn it into a dictatorship. It was a strange feeling knowing how one signature decades ago had set the stage for everything that followed. That night I walked down to the end of the new dock. The lake was calm, the sunset bleeding orange and purple across the ripples. Evelyn joined me halfway carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You know," she said softly, "I think people finally understand what this place is supposed to be." I took a sip. "A community, not a kingdom." She smiled. "Exactly. For a while it was like living under a tiny monarchy." "Every kingdom has its fall," I said. "Ours just came with better lighting and a lease clause." She laughed, shaking her head. "You could have evicted us all, you know." "Started over." "Maybe," I said. But then Karen would have won. She thrived on division. Fixing the lake, keeping it alive, that's the real victory. A few weeks later, the new board held a community day, free food, music, and games. No speeches, no fines, no forms. Just people laughing on picnic blankets, kids racing each other along the water's edge. At one point, Miguel grabbed the mic. To our landlord, the man who taught us that fine print can be a weapon for good, everyone laughed and clapped. I raised my drink in mock salute, feeling a mix of embarrassment and pride. Later that evening, as dusk settled, Evelyn came up with an envelope. "The board wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was a single document, Resolution 2025-01, recognition of riparian rights and gratitude to Riverview Land Trust. It declared the HOA's formal acknowledgement of the true ownership structure, the lease reforms, and the first TNO, commitment to operate with transparency, legality, and mutual respect. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. "You didn't have to do this. We wanted to," she said, "because none of this would have changed if you hadn't stood your ground." I looked across the lake at the calm water, the golden lights reflecting off the boathouse, the quiet laughter drifting through the air. Peace had finally returned. For a man who'd spent his life drafting blueprints, permits, and lease clauses, this was the first time I felt like I'd built something truly meaningful, not with concrete or contracts, but with courage and patience. Karen once told me I'd regret not joining her HOA. Funny thing, the moment she left, everyone finally started acting like a community. As the last of the daylight faded, I sat back on my porch and opened my journal, writing the final entry of the saga. In the end, it wasn't about land leases or bylaws. It was about ownership, not of property, but of integrity. The lake doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to those who respect it enough to let it stay calm. I closed the notebook and smiled to myself. The ripples on the water glimmered in the moonlight, reflecting something that felt like justice, quiet, steady, and unshakable. Karen could run to another HOA, start another reign, print 1,000 bylaws, but she'd never understand the one rule that mattered most. Real authority doesn't come from a clipboard. It comes from character. Sometimes the loudest person in the room believes that volume equals power, that rules and threats can bend others to their will. But real authority isn't declared, it's earned. When you stand for truth quietly and consistently, the noise eventually collapses under its own weight. This story isn't just about HOA drama or petty fines. It's about patience, integrity, and knowing when to let the truth speak louder than anger. If you've ever dealt with a Karen who mistook control for leadership, remember this: you don't have to yell back. Just know your facts, stand your ground, and let time expose the cracks in their foundation. Watch until the end, because justice doesn't always arrive in sirens. Sometimes it comes in silence.